Meroa was a land blessed by the gods, or so the songs of the griots claimed. Vast savannas stretched to the horizon, their golden grasses whispering in the wind. The rivers gleamed like molten silver under the sun, bringing life to the people who lived along their banks. Villages dotted the landscape, each bustling with laughter, trade, and the hum of daily life. Yet, beneath this surface of abundance, shadows crept into every corner of the kingdom. The people of Meroa were tired. Tax collectors, greedy and unrelenting, stripped villages of their harvests. Soldiers, once protectors of the land, had become enforcers of an unjust system. In the palace at the heart of the kingdom, King Jelani, aging and frail, sat on a throne surrounded by advisors who whispered poison into his ears. The common folk called them the vultures, for they feasted on the kingdom's misery. In the small village of Wajiji, nestled along the bend of the Omari River, the people had learned to endure. Among them was Nia, the daughter of the village herbalist. With her sharp mind and a heart full of compassion, she had become a pillar of her community. Her braided hair, adorned with beads gifted by those she had helped, spoke of her wisdom and strength. Her voice carried weight, and even the elders listened when she spoke. The Omwaka festival was approaching, a time when the villages of Meroa came together to celebrate the year's blessings. This year, however, the festival felt more like an escape from the growing despair. Wajiji prepared eagerly, decorating its central square with vibrant Kent cloth and stringing lanterns made from hollowed gourds. Drummers practiced their rhythms, and storytellers rehearsed tales of old, hoping to lift the spirits of those who would gather. The village square was alive with color and sound. Women in flowing garments danced in synchronized steps, their movements telling stories of love, war, and triumph. Men played the drums with fervor, their beats echoing into the night sky. Children darted between stalls selling roasted maize, carved wooden animals, and strings of cowrie shells. Nia moved through the crowd, her presence commanding but approachable. She paused to help an elderly woman who had dropped her walking stick, earning a smile of gratitude. As she passed by the main stage, she noticed a commotion near the edge of the square. A young boy stood trembling before an angry merchant, clutching a bundle of yams. "Thief!" the merchant shouted, his face red with fury. "You dare to steal from me?" The boy's eyes were wide with fear, and the crowd began to gather, murmuring amongst themselves. Nia pushed her way to the front, her voice cutting through the noise. "What happened here?" "This boy tried to steal my yams," the merchant spat. "He must be punished." Nia crouched down to the boy's level, her voice soft but firm. "Why did you take them?" "My mother is sick," the boy whispered, tears streaming down his face. "We have no food." Nia stood, turning to the crowd. "Is this what we have become? A kingdom where a child must steal to keep his family alive? Who is truly at fault here, the boy, or the system that has failed him?" Her words sent a ripple through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, while others exchanged uneasy glances. The merchant, taken aback, stammered, "He still broke the law." "And what law allows children to go hungry while others feast?" Nia shot back. She reached into her pouch, pulling out a few coins, and handed them to the merchant. "This should cover your yams. Now let the boy go." The crowd erupted into applause as the merchant reluctantly stepped back. The boy ran off, and Nia's gaze swept over the faces around her. She saw anger, hope, and determination, a mirror of her own emotions. Unbeknownst to her, Prince Dakarai had been watching. Dressed in simple robes to blend in with the villagers, he had come to the festival to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the palace. What he had witnessed stirred something deep within him. As the night wore on, Dakarai approached Nia near the riverbank, where she sat watching the moonlight dance on the water. "That was a brave thing you did," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Nia turned, surprised to see a man she didn't recognize. "Bravery is what we do when we have no other choice." "You spoke with wisdom beyond your years," Dakarai said, sitting beside her. "Meroa needs more voices like yours." "And who are you to decide what Meroa needs?" Nia asked, her tone tinged with suspicion. He hesitated for a moment before replying, "A man who wishes to see change." The two talked long into the night, sharing their thoughts on the kingdom's plight. Though Nia didn't trust him completely, she couldn't deny that his words carried sincerity. When he finally left, she found herself wondering who he truly was. As the festival ended and the villagers returned to their homes, Dakarai stood on a hill overlooking the square. The moon cast a pale light on his thoughtful expression. He knew that meeting Nia had changed something in him, but he also knew the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. From the shadows, a figure watched him, a rebel scout, ready to report back to Sefu. The capital of Meroa, Umoja, was a city of contrasts. Its sprawling streets were filled with merchants, scholars, and craftsmen, their voices rising in a cacophony of trade and chatter. Above it all loomed the royal palace, a testament to the kingdom's wealth and history, with towering spires that caught the first rays of the morning sun. Yet, despite its grandeur, the palace was stifling for Dakarai, the firstborn prince. Prince Dakarai stood at the balcony of his chambers, gazing out at the city. The view should have been a source of pride, but today it felt like a mockery. Below, he could see the slums creeping closer to the palace walls, a stark reminder of the kingdom's growing inequality. The sounds of the city barely reached him, muffled by the palace's imposing stone walls. His father, King Jalani, had once been a great ruler, beloved by the people for his wisdom and fairness. But age had wearied the king, and his once firm hand had slackened. Now, the king's council wielded much of the power, their decisions driven by greed and self-interest. The people called them the vultures, and Dakarai couldn't disagree. The council chamber was a room of ornate carvings and golden embellishments, a stark contrast to the grim discussions that often took place there. Dakarai sat at the far end of the table, his posture straight but his hands clenched under the table. "Your Highness," began Chief Advisor Mwana, a man with sharp features and eyes like a hawk. "The recent tax collections from the southern provinces have been insufficient. We must increase the levy to maintain order." "Order?" Dakarai's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Or are you funding your private ventures again, Mwana?" The advisor bristled but recovered quickly, offering a thin smile. "Prince Dakarai, you must understand that discipline is necessary for governance. These villages, Dakarai interrupted, are starving. The people are angry, and if we continue down this path, they won't just whisper rebellion, they'll act on it." A murmur rippled through the council, but King Jalani raised his hand for silence. His voice, though weary, still carried authority. "Dakarai," he said, his tone a mixture of reprimand and exhaustion, "you're passionate as you credit, but governance requires pragmatism. Let us not speak of rebellion lightly." Dakarai opened his mouth to argue, but stopped himself. He knew this battle was lost before it began. The council's decisions were made long before the meetings, orchestrated behind closed doors. With a curt nod, he rose and left the chamber, his frustration simmering just below the surface. As Dakarai walked through the palace gardens, he was drawn to the scent of blooming frangipani. The gardens were his sanctuary, a place where the weight of royal expectations felt slightly lighter. He paused by a stone bench and sat, letting his mind wander to a simpler time. He remembered his mother, Queen Anaya, a woman of unparalleled grace and compassion. She had died when he was just a boy, but her lessons had stayed with him. One memory stood out vividly, a visit to a remote village when he was 7 years old. The people had gathered in the square, their faces weary but hopeful as they presented their grievances to the queen. Rather than addressing them from a raised platform, Anaya had stepped down to stand among them. She had listened to each person, her presence a balm to their pain. Later, she had told Dakarai, "A ruler who does not listen to their people is no ruler at all." The memory brought a bittersweet smile to Dakarai's face. He missed her wisdom, her clarity. He often wondered what she would think of Meroa now. That evening, as the moon rose high over Umoja, Dakarai sat in his chambers, his thoughts drifting to the woman he had met at the festival. Nia. Her voice had carried conviction, her words laced with both fire and compassion. She had challenged him, forced him to see the kingdom's plight through a sharper lens. He couldn't get her out of his mind. There was a strength in her that he found both inspiring and intimidating. She had made him question his own role in the kingdom's failings. Was he doing enough? Was he too complacent, too willing to accept the council's decisions? Dakarai rose and paced the room. He needed to see her again, not just to satisfy his curiosity, but to understand how someone like her could see a path forward when he felt so lost. 2 days later, Dakarai left the palace under the guise of overseeing a new irrigation project in Wajiji. He traveled with a small entourage, but he instructed them to keep their distance once they reached the village. He wanted to speak to the villagers without the barrier of royal formality. When he arrived, Wajiji was alive with activity. Children played by the riverbank, women carried baskets of yams on their heads, and men worked to repair a damaged roof. Dakarai noticed the weariness etched into their faces, but also the resilience in their movements. He found Nia by the edge of the village, tending to a sick child. She looked up as he approached, her expression a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "You again," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "What brings the prince to our humble village?" Dakarai was taken aback. "You know who I am?" "I have eyes," she replied, her tone sharp. "And ears. What do you want?" "I want to understand," Dakarai said earnestly. "The people, their struggles. I want to help." Nia studied him for a long moment. "Words are easy, Your Highness. Action is harder. What will you do when the council blocks your every move? When the vultures pick apart your promises?" Dakarai sighed. "I don't have all the answers. But I want to try." For the first time, Nia's expression softened. "If you truly mean that, then you're welcome here. But be prepared to listen, really listen." Over the next few days, Dakarai spent time in Wajiji, speaking with the villagers, helping with their daily tasks, and learning about their lives. Nia was always nearby, watching him with a critical eye but slowly warming to his presence. They shared long conversations in the evenings, their debates growing less heated and more collaborative. Nia's insight and empathy challenged Dakarai to think differently. And though she still held reservations about him, she couldn't deny the sincerity in his efforts. On his last night in Wajiji, Dakarai stood by the river, the moonlight casting his reflection on the water. He felt a sense of clarity he hadn't experienced in years. Nia joined him, her arms crossed but her demeanor relaxed. "You're not what I expected," she admitted. "But I still don't know if I can trust you." "I'll earn it," Dakarai promised. From the trees, another pair of eyes watched, the same rebel scout who had followed Dakarai from the festival. He slipped away into the shadows, his report ready for Sefu. Deep in the heart of the Zuberi forest, where ancient trees stood like silent sentinels, a flicker of firelight broke the darkness. The rebel camp was hidden beneath the thick canopy, its presence masked by the dense foliage and the strategic placement of sentries. The camp was alive with quiet activity, whispers of strategy, the sharpening of weapons, and the occasional crackle of the central fire. Sefu, the rebel leader, stood apart from the others, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the firelight. His gaze was fixed on a tattered map spread across a makeshift wooden table. Sefu was a man in his early 30s, with sharp cheekbones and a muscular build that spoke of years of hardship. His eyes were piercing and dark, filled with both determination and a shadow of grief. He wore a sleeveless leather tunic reinforced with iron studs, and his arms bore scars, each a testament to battles fought for the freedom of his people. A scout approached cautiously, bowing slightly before speaking. "Leader Sefu, I have returned from Wajiji." Sefu's eyes flicked to the scout, sharp and assessing. "What did you see?" "The prince," the scout began. "He was there. Speaking to the villagers, working with them." At this, Sefu's jaw tightened. "Dakarai," he muttered, the name laced with disdain. "What game is he playing now?" The Zuberi forest had long been a sanctuary for those who opposed the crown. The rebels were not mere bandits or outlaws, they were farmers, craftsmen, and even former soldiers who had grown tired of the kingdom's increasing exploitation. Heavy taxes, forced labor, and the council's corruption had driven them to desperation. Many had lost their homes, their families, or their livelihoods to the crown's greed. Sefu had not chosen this path lightly. Born in a small village near Meroa's border, he had once been a loyal soldier in King Jelani's army. But everything changed when his village was razed by tax collectors and their mercenaries, who sought to punish them for failing to meet their quotas. Sefu had returned to find his home in ashes and his family gone. That day, he vowed to bring down the monarchy and its corrupt council. As the camp settled for the night, Sefu walked the perimeter, his footsteps light but purposeful. He stopped by a group of young recruits, their faces still soft with inexperience. They looked up at him with a mixture of awe and fear. "Tomorrow, you'll train with Duma," he said, nodding toward one of his senior fighters. "Learn to fight, yes. But more importantly, learn to protect. We fight for the people, not for revenge." The recruits nodded solemnly, their expressions hardening with resolve. Sefu moved on, his heart heavy. Each new recruit was a reminder of how desperate the people had become. Children, barely old enough to hold a weapon, now looked to him for guidance. He hated the necessity of it but knew there was no other way. Back at the fire, the scout who had observed Dakarai approached Sefu again. This time, his voice was urgent. "Leader, there's something else." "The woman." Sefu raised an eyebrow. "What woman?" "The one from the festival," the scout explained. "She was with him. They spoke by the river, and she seemed to challenge him." At this, Sefu's interest was piqued. "Nia," he said, half to himself. He had heard whispers of her name in the villages, of her strength, her compassion, her ability to unite people. If Dakarai was aligning himself with her, it could complicate the rebellion's plans. "She's a healer," the scout added. "But there's something about her. The villagers trust her." Sefu nodded slowly, his mind racing. "Keep watching. I want to know every move she makes, and every word the prince speaks." The next morning, Sefu called a council of his own. Around the central fire, his lieutenants gathered: Duma, a hulking former blacksmith; Naya, a sharp-eyed tracker who could move through the forest like a shadow; and Jabari, the strategist whose calm demeanor belied a razor-sharp mind. "We can't wait much longer," Duma growled, pounding his fist into his palm. "The people are ready to rise. But are they prepared to fight?" Naya countered. "It's one thing to want freedom. It's another to bleed for it." Sefu held up a hand, silencing the debate. "The people's anger is our greatest weapon," he said. "But we must wield it wisely. Striking too soon could scatter our forces and give the council an excuse to crush us completely." Jabari leaned forward, his fingers tracing the map. "We have allies in the southern provinces. If we can rally them, we'll have enough strength to take Umoja." "And Dakarai?" Naya asked. "He's not like the rest of the royal family. The villagers respect him." Sefu's expression hardened. "Dakarai is a prince. And no prince can be trusted." Later that day, Sefu summoned one of his swiftest runners, a young woman named Ayana. "Find this healer, Nia," he instructed, handing her a small scroll sealed with wax. "Give her this message. Tell her it's from the people of Meroa." Ayana nodded and disappeared into the forest, moving with the speed and silence of a deer. Sefu watched her go, his mind heavy with questions. Nia could be a powerful ally, or a dangerous obstacle. Either way, he needed to understand her role in the growing unrest. As night fell, the camp grew quiet, the only sounds the distant calls of nocturnal birds and the crackle of dying embers. Sefu stood once more at the edge of the camp, staring into the darkness. In the distance, a flicker of movement caught his eye. He tensed, his hand instinctively moving to the hilt of his blade. But the figure that emerged from the shadows was no threat. It was Naya. "There's something you should see," she said, her voice low. Sefu followed her to the outskirts of the camp, where a second scout waited, breathing hard from a long journey. "Leader," the scout said, "the villagers are whispering of a meeting. Dakarai is planning something." Sefu's eyes narrowed. "Then we'll plan something too." The rebel leader's face was a mask of determination as he turned back toward the fire, the flickering flames reflecting in his piercing gaze. The battle for Meroa was coming, and Sefu would be ready. The sun had barely risen over the kingdom of Meroa, casting golden beams through the windows of the royal palace. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with the scent of incense and the murmurs of the council members. The king's court was an impressive sight. Large tapestries adorned the stone walls, depicting scenes of historical battles, regal ceremonies, and the rich history of Meroa's monarchy. But despite its beauty, there was tension in the air, as though the very stones could sense the impending unrest that stirred outside the palace walls. Prince Dakarai, the second son of King Jalani, stood by a tall, arched window overlooking the sprawling city. His dark hair was neatly tied back, and his royal garments were immaculate, a deep crimson robe embroidered with gold thread and a silver clasp at his throat. Yet there was a restlessness in his eyes, a quiet fury that few would dare to mention. Beside him stood his most trusted advisor, Counselor Amina. A sharp, calculating woman in her mid-40s, with dark skin, high cheekbones, and a carefully poised expression. Her robes were equally grand, yet her presence commanded respect not through grandeur, but through intellect and influence. "Your Highness," Amina began, her voice low and careful, "the rebellion grows stronger by the day. We have reports of large gatherings, whispers of an uprising in the villages near Zuberi Forest. You must be prepared." Dakarai turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I have heard the same rumors, Amina. But I do not believe in these idle threats. The people of Meroa are not foolish enough to risk everything in a fight they cannot win." The advisor's gaze hardened slightly. "It is not just the commoners, Your Highness. There are rumors of former soldiers and leaders from the past, fighters like Sefu, who have long held a grudge against the crown. Their cause has ignited a fire among the people, and it's spreading quickly." Sefu. The name reverberated in Dakarai's mind. A former captain in the royal army, a man whose loyalty had once been unshakable. Yet, the day he had been dismissed from service, disgraced by false charges, his anger had festered into something far more dangerous. "I'll deal with Sefu when the time comes," Dakarai said dismissively. "For now, I have another matter to attend to." Amina raised an eyebrow. "And what matter might that be, Your Highness?" Later that afternoon, the royal gardens were bathed in the soft light of the setting sun. The palace grounds, usually filled with courtiers and royal servants, were quieter now, the sounds of nature the only backdrop to a clandestine meeting. Prince Dakarai had arranged for a private audience with someone unexpected, Nia, the healer whose reputation had been spreading across the villages in the south. She had become a symbol of hope for many, her gentle hands healing wounds that the kingdom's doctors could not, her presence a comfort to those who had suffered under the crown's taxes and cruel policies. Dakarai paced back and forth in the garden, waiting for her arrival. His thoughts were conflicted. He had heard much about Nia, how she had organized villagers, how her calm demeanor had won her the trust of many, even those who had once been loyal to the monarchy. And yet, she was a woman who held power, a power that could sway the hearts of the people. He needed to understand her, to learn where her allegiances lay, before they took a dangerous turn. The soft rustle of footsteps interrupted his thoughts, and he turned to see Nia emerge from the path, her simple but elegant attire flowing with every step. She wore a loose, flowing tunic of earth tones, her long hair pulled back into a braid that fell over her shoulder. Her face was calm, her dark eyes wide with a certain strength that belied the softness of her features. "Prince Dakarai," she greeted him, her voice warm but with an undercurrent of wariness. "You asked for this meeting. I must admit, I am curious as to why." Dakarai studied her for a moment. She was not what he had expected. The rumors had spoken of a woman who was a healer, a kind-hearted soul who helped those in need, yet now standing before him, she seemed far more capable and poised than he had imagined. Her presence was powerful, and it unsettled him. "I wanted to speak with you, Nia," he began, keeping his voice calm and measured. "There are rumors of unrest, of a rebellion brewing in the south. People are gathering around Sefu and his cause. I wish to understand why." Nia tilted her head slightly, her gaze never leaving his. "And what do you intend to do with that understanding?" she asked, her voice soft but pointed. "I want to know if you stand with the people or against them," Dakarai replied, his tone firm, though a hint of something softer lingered behind his words. Nia stepped closer, her eyes searching his face, as if weighing his sincerity. "I stand with the people, Prince," she said. "But that does not mean I stand against you." For a brief moment, silence stretched between them. Dakarai could feel the weight of her words settling into him. He had expected her to be more hesitant, perhaps even fearful of aligning herself with a prince. But instead, she stood tall, unafraid, her gaze unwavering. It made him question his own intentions. "I don't want a war, Nia," Dakarai said quietly. "I want to bring peace to this kingdom. But peace cannot be built on the suffering of the people. I would ask you to help me, to work with me so that we may find a way to end this unrest without bloodshed." Nia looked down for a moment, her fingers lightly brushing a flower near her. Then, she met his gaze once more, her eyes filled with quiet resolve. "Peace can only be built when the people are heard," she said softly. "When the suffering ends, when their pain is acknowledged. And I will help the people, no matter the cost." Dakarai's heart sank. He had hoped for an ally in Nia, but now it seemed clear that she would not be swayed by royal promises. She was no fool, she saw through the facades, through the royal lies, and she had chosen her side. The realization struck him hard. As Nia turned to leave, her long braids swaying with each step, Dakarai stood frozen in place. His mind raced. He had been so sure that he could win her over with promises of peace, but she had rejected them, as had the people. His heart wavered with conflicting emotions, his loyalty to his father, King Jelani, battled against his growing empathy for the people. The king's ruthless reign had brought prosperity to the monarchy, but it had also crushed the spirits of the common folk. Now, Dakarai was caught in the middle, torn between his duty as a prince and his growing belief that Meroa needed change. "Nia," he called after her, his voice soft yet firm. She paused, but did not turn around. "Perhaps there is more we can discuss. Come, stay for dinner. Let us continue this conversation." She hesitated, then nodded. "Very well, Your Highness. But I will not be swayed by courtly promises. I believe you deserve to know the truth, not lies." Dakarai watched her walk away, the weight of her words pressing heavily upon him. He had asked for the truth, but was he truly prepared to face it?